Now we're going to transition into a fireside chat. We had a ton of questions come in, but if you have additional questions that you would like to ask Marco live, please drop those in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. We did put a call out to social media this past week for some questions for our community, so I'm going to start with some of those. We'll talk a little bit high level, and then we'll get into some specifics. So, Marco, you talked a little bit about this throughout your presentation, but what are the biggest risks and concerns that you're seeing organizations have with adopting AI?
Many organizations today are trying to find ways to operationalize AI in production and operationalize it at scale. I'm sure that in our audience, there are developers that are working in organizations that are today thinking about building something similar to what we've just presented today, some type of AI infrastructure that allows them to understand what is the traffic, that understands, what Gen AI consumption we're doing. And look, I am a developer, and but I also obviously absolutely understand the requirements that an organization has, because the risks are very high, and someone has to be accountable for those risks. And so being able to offer an AI infrastructure that's centralized, that allows us to manage that traffic and secure it, and making sure that we're not creating harm in the business with the end users, with the customers, it is essential. I don't think that an organization is going to feel confident to go in production before having this type of infrastructure in place, because otherwise it is the Wild West. And how can we operationalize the Wild West? It's very hard to do so. And also, having observability on what is the AI traffic that we're generating, we want to get better over time. So look, infrastructure, it allows us to scale, and it allows us to go in production. And the biggest challenges today is the lack of such infrastructure, which also brought us to the creation of an AI gateway, because we saw that as being the biggest blocker to Gen AI adoption. And once we have the infrastructure, a larger population of developers is going to be able to then harness Gen AI, because by making it easier to use Gen AI through the infrastructure, then more people will use it. When things are easier, the adoption increases. It's just how it is, not just in AI, but anything in the world. And if we make it easier, then more developers will be able to harness it, and Gen AI adoption will be able to explode within the organization.
I think this is the biggest question we got, right, is around security and governance. What are some of those main attack vectors that you're seeing from an LLM perspective?
Oh, there is all sorts of things. Let's start with the obvious ones. Leaking sensitive data or customer personal information inside of an LLM so that it can be extracted later on by a different prompt. I mean, these are very serious risks, and there needs to be the ability to sanitize this information and being able to also clean it up as we keep fine-tuning our models. I mean, that's for sure one of the biggest ones. The models can also act erratically, in a sense that if they're not being guardrailed in the proper way, they may have unexpected outcomes that our customers may not find appropriate. Think of content moderation, think of limiting harmful language and things like that. I mean, these are things that could potentially impact the business in negative ways, and these are things that have to be solved before we move to production. The ability to jailbreak a prompt, LLMs are not necessarily the best tool in the job to be able to enforce rules and to be able to enforce those guardrails. They are very poor at self-governing themselves. And so what we need is a governance layer that acts before the LLM even comes into play. I mean, these are all risks. The lack of such a system introduces a risk in the adoption of Gen AI. And look, I am very excited about Gen AI. I do believe that AI is the new data. I like to say that the internet as we know it, it's not the internet that we grew up with. It's not the internet of websites and emails. It's API driven, because obviously everything we do is API driven. Every mobile application, it's all API. 85% of the internet traffic is APIs. APIs is the new internet. And if APIs is the new internet, AI is the new data. And so we want to make sure that we can access this data the best way possible, the most secure way possible, but we need to have infrastructure in place, because the risks are misuse of data and everything else that entails, which can be quite critical. It is quite critical to solve before obviously going in production.
Yeah, there's a couple follow-up questions there that I think are interesting to dive into here. But for highly regulated industries, how would you guarantee that fail-safe performance for worldwide uses? Talking about financial, medical, government, when that kind of high availability and disaster recoverability might not be sufficient.
Well, we need to first make sure that whatever we have, it's working well. How do we do that? By starting small and growing big over time. I don't think that financial institutions are looking at implementing, for example, Gen AI at scale immediately across the entire customer base. This is new. It's an incredible amount of power that we have to create new customer experiences. It's very powerful, but at the same time, because it's also risky, we need to take a start slow and then move fast approach by making sure we can de-risk the adoption of Gen AI. What does that mean? That we put in place the right rules, the right checks, that we verify that these checks are being respected. We need to have observability to measure not only what the Gen AI adoption is, but also observability to be able to identify potential misuses of Gen AI. So it is not about what we are doing, it's also making sure that we're doing it right. And financial institutions or higher regulated industries, medical, financial, and so on and so forth, they have to start creating a playbook that allows us to verify that the approach is valid. And one of the best ways to do this, it is, of course, by leveraging automation. Gen AI, even more so, even more than APIs, this whole world of AI pipelines, of AI security, of AI enforcement has to be fully automated since day one, because the risks are even higher than the ones we were facing with APIs. And so being able to set up automation that allows us to validate the adoption over time and create a playbook for the adoption of AI, it is necessary. Well, it's a playbook for adoption of AI. Well, it's the playbook for how do we introduce new Gen AI use cases? How do we create a playbook for approving or denying the prompts? How do we create a playbook for approving or denying certain areas that we want LLM to discuss or not to discuss? We need to have a playbook for each one of these different areas, and then we need to check that the playbooks are doing their job. So the process of creating these rules and then verifying that the rules, these already exist in the organization. They have to be expanded, obviously, in the Gen AI use case. But it's very hard to do so without the right infrastructure. The infrastructure is essential, again, to be able to enforce this.
Yeah, we have another great question, I think, in this realm of talking about the OWASP top 10 for LLMs. Could the Kong platform essentially provide controls that are mapped to those guidelines?
100%. And we are actually just about to release a blog post where we discuss how AI Gateway can be used to protect ourselves from those top 10. I was laughing because whoever asked this question read my mind because we are literally just about to create this week or early next week to create a blog post where we'll discuss how AI Gateway can be used for the OWASP top 10 around the LLM usage. So yes, it can. And if you stay tuned on our blog, you will actually get more fine-grained details on how that can be accomplished.
Awesome. We'll make sure to send that one out as well then. And then just a little more on the tactical side. We got a couple questions around compliance and certifications and all of that. The question was specifically around FedRAMP, but kind of curious about the existing certifications or compliance or plan for that.
Well, the nice thing is that we are building on top of production-ready software, which is Kong Gateway, which I'm sure you're familiar with. This is an extension of that underlying runtime. So first and foremost, Kong Gateway, and therefore AI Gateway, can be deployed in a fully compartmentalized, self-hosted way, both the control plane and the data plane. That is an option. Then another deployment model, it is to use a cloud control plane, which simplifies the management of all things related to AI. But then the data plane is hybrid. So the data plane can still be downloaded and it can still run within your environment. So the AI traffic never leaves your environment, but you have the comfort of having this unified control plane. The control plane that we have for AI Gateway covers, all the certifications like SOC 2, PCI. We do have a series of those. Get in touch with Kong if you would like to get access to the full list. And AI Gateway is being covered by that. And then we also provide AI Gateway as a fully hosted SaaS solution. So let's say that we want to run AI Gateway infrastructure on AWS, on Azure, on multiple regions, and we want to do that with auto-scaling and in one click. Well, that's what dedicated Cloud Gateways on Connected does. It's a new offering that we just announced in April 2024, just a few months ago. And of course, AI Gateway runs on top of this product. Therefore, it inherits all the parent compliances that we have already for the Cloud Gateway and Connect platform. So for the full list, I'm sure the Kong team, the sales team will be happy to give you the full list. But there are compliances in place. And today we are already working in highly regulated industries. Kong is very popular, as a matter of fact, in those industries. Therefore, we are very sensitive to the need for proper compliance to reduce the security risk during your security assessment.
All right, I'm sure we'll get back here to security, but in terms of other top concerns, cost was I think the one mentioned most. With AI adoption, you can burn through credits really quickly. It can be expensive. We talked a little bit about this in your presentation, but can you talk about some of the recommendations on managing costs?
Well, cost is an interesting one because yes, Gen AI at scale, it is going to be pricey, especially if you use cloud-hosted solutions. I mean, all solutions have different pricing, right? So, but obviously, a self-hosted solution can help us optimize some of that cost. I think that some of the cost is being driven by usage, and some of the cost is being driven by training of our models. And there is a fine line between using RAG and fine-tuning our models that we really need to understand. Some organizations really enjoy using foundation models and they use RAG for everything else. That's cheaper because we don't have any spend on the training, but the problem is RAG can be quite inefficient at scale. So essentially the customer experience suffers because we have to now fetch all these external data sources and then inject them into the request. The performance suffers and the latency suffers. On the other end, if we fine-tune the models, of course, there's going to be more spend in training, in extracting the training data set and then fine-tuning the models. But on the other end, we provide a better customer experience. How do we optimize costs there? Well, I think it's good. It's going to be a mix of both. We have to fine-tune our models with the data sources that we know are critical and table stakes for our models to be smart. And the models also, by the way, is the IP of the organization. It is what really the secret sauce of using Gen AI. It is what data we're using for the model, because different organizations are going to be having different data, but the value is in the data. And then use RAG, when we think we can further compensate for some of those information to reduce hallucinations, but it cannot just be RAG. Otherwise, the performance is going to be abysmal. So, being able to manage costs when training the models, it's something interesting. Another point of view I would like to bring is that there is an opportunity for organizations to also monetize the models. Today, some organizations are monetizing APIs because they're creating value that can be harnessed by the usage of APIs. But in the AI world, models are the API to monetize. Therefore, the models themselves could be an additional revenue stream for organizations that want to platformize their intelligence that's being delivered through some of these fine-tuned models. So there is also the ability to potentially being able to sell it. And so going back to the original question, managing cost, well, we need to manage consumption, we need to manage training, we need to strike the right balance between RAG and fine-tuning. We need to decommission older models that we don't need to maintain so that we can even further reduce the cost of maintainability. We need to be able to introduce capabilities like the ones I just discussed, semantic caching, for example, to even further optimize costs whenever we have requests that are similar that don't warrant a new Gen AI request every time. And then some organizations we're working with are managing costs by self-hosting their own models, and they're using the AI gateway infrastructure to basically start with the cloud models and then use their responses to train as training data set for the self-hosted models that are running themselves. And then the ability to also load balance between the self-hosted one and the cloud one for failover as we gather more maturity in running Gen AI LLMs at scale. So, there are a few angles and there is a few things. So the good news is that we have options. And the bad news is that if we don't think of these options, it's going to be prohibitively expensive. And so we have to start now thinking about what we have. So from our standpoint, from an infrastructure standpoint, we try to do our best to making sure that all the data, all the observability, all the cost-saving feature requests that we can provide are there since day one, ready to use.
That was a part of that was a good, I think, segue to another question that we have, which is, we're talking about LLMs, but will there be future support for other generative AI? We got some questions around Hugging Face, supporting custom models, all of that.
100%. We have built a pluggable system. We are going to continuously be adding new LLM providers. And by the way, Hugging Face is most likely going to be the next one after the GA of Bedrock and Gemini. It's going to be Hugging Face because we can get access to hundreds of thousands of models there. So we want to do Hugging Face, but Hugging Face is going to be one of the many that we're going to be adding support for. Look, at the end of the day, Kong and being the CTO of the organization and the co-founder of I'm very proud about the technology and the team that we have at Kong. We're very quick into adding new models and new providers. It's a prioritization effort, like always. And so if there is something that you would really like us to support, the best way to make it happen is to tell us. And if you tell us, then we'll be able to introduce support for it.
Yeah, that's another great segue, I think, to some of these next questions. I have a few more here around just AI Gateway in general, and then I think we'll get into some more specific tactical stuff around, specific features. Can you comment on data ownership? Who owns the data? Who owns the data that AI consumes through your AI Gateway?
Well, AI Gateway simplifies access to the model. So if the question is, if we use AI Gateway, who owns the data that goes through it? Well, you as a user, as a customer, own that traffic. Therefore, you own the data. If the question is, who owns the data that's being served by the model? Well, the answer is still you as the user or customer, to make sure that the model is being fine-tuned with a training data set for which you have the copyrights for. But there is no data collection or data training that happens on the Kong side. We provide the technology and you can run it. And even if you run it in a managed way through our cloud platform, we are still not looking into that traffic and we have no interest in doing so.
Another question here on the AI Gateway infrastructure. Why AI Gateway infrastructure? Why not inline AI execution to detect and prevent AI-based risk?
You mean on the client side?
I will let them add some more details here. If this was your question, if you can just add some more details in the chat, we can come back to that one. Can you talk about the API upgrade process with respect to downtime, semantic impacts, model impacts, and mandatory and optional data payloads?
So could you repeat the question? That's the upgrade of the infrastructure itself?
Yes.
Well, so yeah, the infrastructure itself can be upgraded in a no downtime capacity. And this is already what we're doing for the Kong gateway itself for APIs. Today, we're processing trillions of requests And if we didn't have a way to provide upgrades between versions of our infrastructure software that was no downtime, it would be non-viable as a technology. So we do have best practices for upgrades. We do have best practices for rollouts of new versions of the software, and all of these can be achieved with no downtime. If you're using the fully managed solution, that's even simpler because the no downtime upgrades are built into the infrastructure itself. So you can choose a new version of AI Gateway, press one button, and we will automatically start a no downtime update of the entire infrastructure to the new version. And of course, we're going to be keeping backwards compatibility with your existing clients in such a way that an upgrade doesn't break existing traffic that's going through it.
All right, and going back to the last question, yes, on the application client side, this was the, why AI gateway infrastructure. Are there any inline AI? One solution is prompt security.
So there could be, and I think that the point is that at scale, it becomes very hard to ask developers that are building these new Gen AI use cases to always do the right thing as they're building their applications. And so if there is only one client application or a couple, then that is certainly a viable option. The developers can integrate security checks on the client itself. As soon as we are ramping up the usage of Gen AI, that becomes a non-scalable process. Essentially, it's like asking every API developer to build authentication, authorization, traffic control, caching, firewalling, security, compliance, every time they are building a new API. And likewise, in the Gen AI use case, infrastructure is an accelerator to the developer productivity so that our clients don't have to be continuously updated. And once we do build a client, we don't have to build infrastructure within the client itself. Now, of course, nothing prevents us from using AI infrastructure and then also doing something on the client. My suggestion is we should be doing things that are very unique for a specific client in the client, but things that we know are going to be common across the board. That's better to put them in the infrastructure because the infrastructure can do that in a centralized way. Plus, if you want to, for example, change the rules on prompt security, well, now we have to go and update our clients to make sure that these new rules, we have to release a new version of our clients and making sure that everybody updates it. And sometimes we don't even own the client, especially when we are opening our platform to an ecosystem of partners that are building on top of our models or our APIs, and we don't control those clients. So if we can push it in a centralized way, that's going to make things easier by a long run for both the developers that are implementing the Gen AI use cases and the platform team that's responsible to ensure that we are compliant in the usage of Gen AI.
Awesome. All right, we have a lot of kind of specific use case questions in here. So Jack and Shane have been in the chat answering a lot of those. Let me just double check here. We have a few more minutes. Let's get to two more. So we've talked a lot about the application developer side of adopting AI. What about the data science side? Kind of, are there any benefits from this there?
Well, yes, there are, especially in a larger organization. The teams that are building Gen AI applications are most likely not going to be the teams that continuously release new models and fine-tune new models. These could be actually separate teams. And the AI Gateway provides a connection between those who build and those who train in a way that we can make sure that they both can operate asynchronously from each other. But the data teams can certainly take advantage of AI Gateway to enable consumption to the models that are fine-tuning and they are creating. They can also embed some specific data behavior within the AI Gateway itself, because again, AI Gateway is, because it leverages the Con Gateway core, it's also extensible. So the features I explained today, these are the ones that we ship built into the product, but the data team or anybody in the organization can also build their own plugins to even further extend what AI Gateway does in a very specific way that's very specific to the organization that's using it. And so the data team can also build new AI Gateway plugins that do even more things that are specific to their use cases. So it certainly provides them a platform and a framework to be able to be effective whenever they are packaging their data into an accessible model that developers need to use.
Awesome. All right. Let's wrap up with one more question. What does the future look like? Are there any trends that you're keeping a close eye on? What are you most excited about? Like, what's keeping you up at night?
I'm excited about revolutionizing RAG and how it fundamentally works. I think that this is a new field, as we all know. And as this field matures, we're going to be seeing efficiencies and inefficiencies in how we do some of the things that we do. And RAG particularly is an area of focus for me, and it's going to be something we want to improve moving forward because we need RAG. Whether we fine-tune the models or not, there is always going to be a component of RAG to reduce the hallucinations and making sure that the outcome we present through Gen AI is always correct. And can that be achieved without having to ask developers to build pipelines all the time? Can we build centralized RAG pipelines that we can leverage in our AI traffic? If we're able to do that, then we can simplify how RAG is being implemented, and we can make that expertise available to every developer that wants to use Gen AI. Instead of now, every developer has to think about how to build their own pipelines, and some of them do it well, some of them don't do it so well. If we can provide that as part of the infra, well, then it becomes more exciting because now every developer can get access to RAG without having to build it from scratch. And so in the very specific use case of AI, that is something that makes me quite excited. It's a feature set that I believe it is ripe for disruption.